So now it is my honor to welcome as our first speaker, appropriately enough, New York City's Police Commissioner to deliver opening remarks. We have come to know Bill Bratton over decades, actually. He's a central figure in our world. He's a transformative leader of law enforcement, somebody who has put the professionalism of policing front and center of the national debates of our time. And I recall personally, a bit over 20 years ago when Bill Bratton came to New York City, and I had the honor of working for him. He came at a time when we were facing rising homicide rates, a time of deep concern about the well-being of our communities and young people, a time where I think it's not a stretch to say it was a time of crisis. And he came and launched what he called in a book that he wrote a turnaround that changed New York, changed the city that I love, changed the city that is the center of commerce and well-being in New York, in America. And he promoted in American policing a new sense of purpose, a new direction, a concern about public safety, a concern about communities, and an adherence to the principles of community policing. He was here too short a time and left, went on to other things, and then moved to the other coast, to LA, where he was the chief of the LAPD and brought about the full transformation that is his gift to that city. Lower crime rates, better understandings between police and communities of color, a sense of civic vitality and common purpose. And now he's back, we're happy to say, back in New York City, when the city again needs his calm, his determination, his sense of professionalism and integrity, the Bill Bratton style of leadership. But it's important for people here to note that Commissioner Bratton has, for over 2 decades actually, been a promoter of the work that we now embrace at the National Network. David Kennedy and Bill Bratton both tell the story of their first meeting in 1993, I think it was, when David was starting his work at Harvard, working with the police department and community leaders and the U.S. Attorney, Donald Stern, and had this idea that is now so central to our work. Bill didn't stay in Boston long enough to put that idea into action, but Boston did, David did, and the rest is history. Then in LA, Chief Bratton had an opportunity to embrace this work as part of his crime reduction strategy to great effect. And now he comes back to New York. And after years where David and I were knocking on the door of the NYPD, we're finally embraced by a leader who wants these ideas to be part of his crime strategies in this city. So there was born New York City Ceasefire. We're delighted to welcome to this conference, to this college, at this time, somebody who is really transformative leader in policing and a strong proponent of the work that you are doing, Police Commissioner William Bratton.
After an introduction like that, I think I'm just going to say hello and goodbye. Quit while I'm ahead. Jeremy, thank you so much for that very gracious introduction. I did have the good fortune in 1994 as the newly appointed police commissioner to have the opportunity to serve with Jeremy, who was the deputy commissioner for legal matters for about 6 months before moving on to other assignments, including eventually head of the National Institute of Justice, where he did yeoman's work during the Clinton years in advancing the profession of policing and the issues of criminal justice. And he has done wonders with this great school, John Jay. He referenced the 60,000 alumni. I'm pleased that thousands of them are and have been members of the New York City Police Department. It is one of the premier public institutions of learning in the city, and one that we seek to collaborate with and create new alliances with. And particularly, a hallmark of those alliances is this initiative that you are all engaged in. I welcome you all to New York. It is an incredible city. It is going through an incredible renaissance. And I hope that you have the opportunity during your time here to actually get out and see some of it, particularly here along the west side of the city. You don't have to go too far down the West Side Highway to see the resurgence that we are going through. The Hudson Yards, move a little farther down, Battery Park, and certainly down by the 9/11 Memorial and the World Trade Center revitalization. It's an incredible city and one that welcomes you, along with 56 million other people a year who come to visit here. But let's talk about why we're here. You've come to this city at a propitious moment in our history. The topics of your conference: the idea that we must strengthen the bond between the police and the communities they serve, the idea that we can have a safer and fairer city everywhere for everyone, the idea that achieving it is a shared responsibility, a common cause between communities and the criminal justice system. These topics are, as of the moment, as anything can be. The crises that policing and law enforcement and the courts and the prisons and America, really, the crisis we face is the most serious I have seen in my 45-year career, and rivals and maybe in some extent exceeds the crises of the late 60s and 1970s when we were going through a similar period. In its center stage now because of last summer's and last fall's events, specifically police-involved incidents during which black citizens died in Staten Island, Ferguson, Dayton, and many other places, as well as the protests and the unrest that followed, and the murders of police officers here in New York City and elsewhere in America. These events precipitated the crises, but they're not the crises itself. The crisis isn't systemic police brutality, which is fortunately no longer part of our profession. And the crisis isn't racist police terror, as a protester's sign recently proclaimed here in New York. No, the crisis is about an abiding unfairness, a durable dissatisfaction. It's about a great divide between police and some of the community in our most troubled, vulnerable neighborhoods. Neighborhoods where poverty bites deepest, where jobs are most scarce, where schools are most challenged. In my city, those neighborhoods are largely neighborhoods of color. Probably that's the case in most of your cities also, although it's not the case everywhere. Because disadvantage has many shades and crime comes in many hues. We belong to a noble profession, and this country's freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from fear, rest upon the public safety that we provide. The best parts of America's history would have been impossible without the fair application of law and order, but some of the worst parts of our history, and particularly black history, would have been impossible without a perverted, oppressive law and order too. And it doesn't matter that a lot of the worst parts, worst parts happened before many of us were even born, although segregation and Jim Crow laws survived into the 1960s, and that was only 50 years ago. What matters is that our history follows us like a second shadow, one that we can't shake. We can never underestimate the impact these had, the hate and the injustice and the lost opportunities for all of us. In his book, Don't Shoot, David Kennedy called it the mirror image catastrophe. It's the pernicious racial mistrust between community and cop. But where does this leave us? The police, the prosecutors, the people who practice public safety, who proudly practice it. Because law and order should never be the tool of oppression, and certainly not today. And while unfairness and inequality persist, we, as police, face a truth that some others would rather deny. We speak the truth about the world we experience. In our most vulnerable communities, the vulnerable are often victimized by their own. In New York City, where half of our citizens are black and Hispanic, we are a minority-majority city and growing more so all the time. Blacks and Hispanics commit 95% of our shootings, and blacks and Hispanics are 96% of the shooting victims. This disparity exists across all violent crime, although it is not quite as stark as with the shootings. And yet again, where does this leave us? We cannot forget what is behind us, nor the legacy still with us, but we cannot ignore the duty laid before us. And that duty, the purpose of this conference, is to make it right. That duty is to achieve a true public safety, one in which both security and the community are equally emphasized. One in which the well-being of our neighborhoods, our cities, and our country belongs to the police and the public, the common purpose. Because public safety and police legitimacy is a shared responsibility. That is the very essence of our democracy. The fact that we're safer today is indisputable. This city's crime rate declined since 1990 is well known, referenced by Jeremy in his remarks. An 80% decrease in overall major crime, with murders falling from 2,245 in 1990 to 333 last year, the lowest in 6 decades. During the same 25-year span, the city's population has grown by 1.1 million people. Tourist visits nearly doubled. 56 million a year come to the city. At the same time, crime, burglaries and robberies are down 86% and 83% since 1990, and both also saw modern lows in 2014. Robbery, excuse me, robbery, that bellwether crime, particularly dropped an astounding 13% from 2013 to 2014 to the lowest level ever recorded in the city. And overall major crime is down again so far this year. And one of the benefits of that lower crime, apart from certainly the lower number of victims, is the smaller number of people committing those crimes and the smaller number of people who are incarcerated as a result. Because each crime we prevent, we save 2 lives, that of the victim and that of the person who would commit that crime. The state prison population in this city is down, this state is down by 25%. In Rikers Island, our city jail, the decrease is almost 40%. But safety, public safety, without public approval isn't public safety. Sir Robert Peel, my personal hero, told us almost 200 years ago that the police are the public and the public are the police, meaning that police officers come from the public, and that the police depend on public approval. On that score, our surveys tell us that overall, we're doing pretty well. A Quinnipiac poll, a local college, in May showed 50% of New Yorkers approve of how the police are doing their job. Our Congress would kill for an approval rating like that. I think they're around 14%, if they're even that high. But after all, that's a pretty low bar. But it's not enough, particularly because when you break those poll numbers down by race or neighborhood, what we see is far less rosy. We don't need to bridge the great divide between the police and the community. We need to, once and for all, close it. But how do we do that? There is no one path. There are many being tried by police leaders and criminal justice leaders throughout the profession, throughout our country, as evidenced by the conference that you're attending today. The idea is sharing what works, what hasn't worked, what can we create that's new. In any event, it requires what you're here for today, to partner, to collaborate. And all these paths require that, as the President said when he appointed Loretta Lynch as our new Attorney General last week, a presentation, a ceremony I was pleased to be able to attend, the President said, they all require that we use the law as our map and justice as our compass. I love that phrase, the law as our map and justice as our compass. And they all require work, because none of this will be easy. This crisis we're in didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen last summer, and it's not going to be fixed by wishing. But as one of my predecessors, former Police Commissioner Theodore Roosevelt, who went on to become president, once said, I have never in my life envied a human being who led an easy life. I have envied a great many people who led difficult lives and led them well. Our challenge is to lead our lives well. Our challenge, our opportunity, our shared responsibility, our common cause is to close the gap once and for all, to see each other, to really see and understand each other for the first time. So there are many paths, and many of you have ideas that you will share during this conference. I'd like to tell you about some of the ways the NYPD is doing this at this time. Ceasefire is one of those paths, and that's why we're using it here in New York, and that's why I used it in LA, and that's why I began the approval process for its use in Boston many years ago. I'm proud to say that I've been a supporter of the model since a much younger David Kennedy. His hair was just a little shorter then. Wasn't quite a crew cut, but a little shorter. A much younger David Kennedy showed up in my office in Boston. I was the newly appointed police commissioner in 1993, shortly before I left that position to become police commissioner here in New York City. And he had an idea. I liked the idea, but I left before it could be put into place. But I like to believe I planted the seed in the introduction to my successor, Paul Evans, and the rest, as Jeremy Travis says, was history. The incredible successes in Boston, that miracle summer where violence began to go down so dramatically. Most of you in this room certainly know the model, and our New York ceasefire is no different. Together with a wide range of partners, such as the Brooklyn DA, the U.S. Attorney, the ATF, probation and parole, corrections, and social service providers and other community members. Sound familiar? Because it's the same model that we use throughout the country. We hold meetings or call-ins with members of the groups who commit the bulk of the violence in our vulnerable communities, and then we follow the steps. One, focus on the groups, not individuals within the crews, as we call them, the gangs here in New York. Two, use the call-ins to promise you'll hold them accountable for what they've been doing, but let them know you're giving them a chance to change first. Three, make an extreme example of the first group that breaks the pact, as you promised. And four, support the ones who abide by the pact, because you have to keep that part of the promise also. Hearing that from us and from the wide range of government and community partners at the call-ins is what makes ceasefire different, and is what makes it so frequently so successful. It's worked across the country, and we're confident that it will work here also. But we're also working on other things. Many of them coalesce around what we at the NYPD have come to call the 5 T's: trust, training, technology, terrorism, and tackling crime. At the front desk where you checked in, there's some materials that I encourage that you pick up. One is a brochure explaining the 5 T's, which are the foundation of a plan of action that's been 18 months in the making that will be released later this week here in New York. And the other is the 9 principles of Sir Robert Peel, my Bible. The words of Sir Robert Peel, 1829, and his colleagues are more pertinent today than they were then, and I encourage that you read them. The purpose of our 5 T's is ensuring that we get both halves of public safety right. And that's why the first T is trust, and the importance of police legitimacy and procedural justice. It's the one we have to have, and it's the one the others lead to. NYC ceasefire is a part of establishing trust. So are programs like Project Reset, excuse me, which allows younger, nonviolent misdemeanor offenders to be diverted to community justice centers rather than appearing before a judge. Another big component has been changing the way we use certain of our tools. Reasonable suspicion stops, or Terry versus Ohio, stop, question, and frisk, are an integral, lawful part of policing, but this department was using this tool too often. And at the scale at which it was used, it ceased to have the effect it was meant to have, and instead actively undermined our relationship with our minority communities. It effectively eroded police legitimacy. My predecessor, Commissioner Ray Kelly, like me, evidently saw this. During his administration, from a high of nearly 700,000 in 2011, reasonable suspicion stops decreased 22% in 2012, and they decreased overall 72% from 2011 to 2013. During 2014, my and my mayor de Blasio's first year, reasonable suspicion stops were down 93% from their 2011 high. I would point out that crime has gone down every year. We still use the tool. It's indispensable to policing, but we use it in a more focused and impactful way. The rate of arrest has more than doubled from 5.9% in 2011 to 14.5% last year. Crime has gone down, stops have gone down, but the fewer stops we do, obviously the reasonable suspicion was balanced by the larger number of arrests that we're making. This decline in stops, combined with declines in summonses and misdemeanor arrests has led to something that I have called the peace dividend. Last year, when compared to their respective recent highs, there were fewer than 800,000 summonses, arrests, and stops in New York City. 800,000 fewer. Now, that doesn't automatically mean 800,000 fewer contacts. It means 800,000 fewer instances in which enforcement was the outcome. Cops are still interacting with people in this great city. They must. But they're learning that there are alternatives to enforcement that can create equivalent changes in behavior. And isn't that what we're all about? To control behavior to such an extent that we change it, but that we do it constitutionally. We cannot break the law to enforce it. That we do it compassionately. That we do it respectfully. Complaints, I would point out also against police during this period of time to our CCRB, our Civilian Complaint Review Board, are down dramatically after years of steady increase. We know we cannot arrest our way out of our crime control challenges. It's something I've been saying for years. The future should not and cannot and will not be in handcuffs. If a warning works as well as a summons in preventing disorder, we want our officers to use the warning. In dealing with broken windows or quality of life enforcement, and make no mistake, I still believe in and adhere strongly to broken windows, and so does my mayor, and so do the people of the city, according to the most recent Quinnipiac poll. The key to broken windows is stopping low-level disorder and petty crime before they can metastasize into more serious crime. In the 1970s and the 1980s, we stopped policing minor crime in the city, and indeed many cities around the country. We neglected the first of Sir Robert Peel's 9 tenets. Number 1, the basic mission for which the police exists is to prevent crime and disorder. We de-emphasized the prevention and focused on response, and we totally neglected dealing with disorder. And we all saw the results of what happened in America in the 1970s and 1980s. You sweat the small stuff before it becomes the big stuff. But arrests and summonses aren't the only answer. Broken windows is not zero-tolerance policing, and it never was. It focuses on behavior and is based on probable cause, not reasonable suspicion, the bases of stop, question, and frisk. Addressing conditions, but doesn't automatically mean an enforcement action. Sometimes, as I've referenced, a mere admonition or warning will suffice to change the behavior. But in order for our officers to exercise this kind of discretion, we have to train them. This brings us to our second T of the 5 T's, training. In training, we're simultaneously going back to basics and breaking new ground. For many years, excuse me again, for many years, rookie officers in this department were assigned immediately upon graduation from the academy to high crime operation impact zones right after their graduation. Our newest cops, usually 12 of them, under the tutelage of one sergeant, 12 cops scattered over many blocks, like trying to herd cats. Our newest cops learned the enforcement aspects of policing at the expense of the community-oriented aspects. To fix this, and to fix the beginning of the great gap, we've established a full-scale field training program for our newest officers. We team them up now with partner officers, specially selected senior officers who act as partners, coaches, and mentors. I want our newest cops during their first 6 months to be out there with our best so they can learn the job the right way, to do the job and lay foundations for the next 20 years. My passionate belief in this is based on my 7 years of experience at the LAPD, which does a great job with the training of new personnel. A new kid in the LAPD doesn't work by himself or herself for their first year and a half. I think back to my time in Boston, 1970. Literally within 7 weeks of being appointed to the Boston Police Department, I was out in the street in my blue uniform with my 6-shot revolver and my badge that read patrolman, policing the streets of Boston. And I know based on my experience how inadequate that training was and how it did not prepare me for all that I had to face. So based on my own experiences and my own lack of training and how it almost cost me significant issues in my early career, I am emphatic about properly training our young people to do the extraordinary complex jobs that we give to them. These partner offices I referenced also work with hundreds of volunteer community partners who volunteer to introduce new officers to their neighborhoods. For the first time, we're training veteran officers, too, giving them 3 days of intensive training each year in managing street encounters, diffusing situations, and safely resolving the ones that can't be diffused while updating them on changes in the law that are so appropriate to the work they do. And in conjunction with a federal monitor, we're also giving new training on reasonable suspicion, the stop, question, and frisk issue, so that invaluable tool can be used as it's meant to be used. We're supporting our officers, rookies, and veterans alike with new technology, the third T, the next of the 5 Ts. Within the next several weeks, the CompStat process that was implemented 20 years ago during my first tenure, its first major change in 20 years will occur within the next several weeks. It's being totally computerized. Instead of having a 4-inch book of statistics each week that form the bases of the crime reduction efforts, it will now be totally computerized, reflective of the advances in technology. We're also, like many of you, piloting body cameras and have more than 50 officers currently testing them in the field. Although there are challenges associated with the cameras, such as the huge costs, privacy, and policy issues, ultimately, I envision them to be as ubiquitous as our two-way radios. Another technology initiative, the fourth, one that is an integral part of the 5 Ts, is the mobile digital program. Smartphones are being given to nearly every officer, and tablets are being installed in nearly every patrol car. Custom-designed smartphones that are unlike anything that American policing has seen. Additionally, every one of my police cars is now equipped with GPS. In a few short months, that we'll turn that system on that will allow us to identify where every one of our vehicles is at all times. Their deployment draws a democratization of data across the entire department. Patrol officers in the field will be able to use automated translation services, access universal search capabilities, complete NYPD forms, and even take fingerprints without ever having to return to the precinct station house. And by linking mobile digital to our domain awareness system, the system that was built by my predecessor, Ray Kelly, after the tragedy of 9/11, that includes license plate readers, 8,000 CCTV cameras, over 1,000 radiation detection devices, we make every cop a partner in the fight against terror. With regard to terrorism, our 4th T, the threat has changed dramatically in the past year. Organized attacks like the one in Paris remain part of the threat picture. But now there is also the lone wolf model of ICEs. In this city, in just the last several weeks, working with our partners in the federal government, we have made a number of arrests of New Yorkers who were inspired through the internet, through Twitter, by ICEs to commit terrorist acts in this country. Fortunately, with our very aggressive counterterrorism posture, we were able to arrest them before they could affect some of the threats that they were attempting to carry out. To address this new, more complicated reality, the NYPD is changing our Critical Response Command, or CRC. Every day I bring hundreds of officers into Manhattan from around the city, taking them from patrol around the surrounding precincts to help police events, demonstrations, and potential terrorist locations in the city. Instead of drawing those hundreds of officers from patrol precincts each day and depleting local resources, the CRC will now be staffed with almost 400 officers full-time, equipped and trained to counter active shooters and other types of potential terrorist attack. And by leaving patrol cops on patrol, that's an augmentation of our final T, tackling crime, the basic mission for which we exist. This part hinges on a new neighborhood policing model that represents the culmination of my nearly 50 years in policing. It will be more fully discussed in our forthcoming plan of action, which will be released later this week. A regular refrain in the conversation about bridging the divide between police and the community is that, despite training on new technologies, nothing will change until the police culture changes. Community policing has long been held up as the way to do that, but until now, we've never been able to really operationalize it in most communities. For too long, community policing has been a program rather than what it was intended to be, a philosophy. We separate the officers who do it from the ones who answer jobs or catch bad guys. Our vision of community policing, neighborhood policing, changes that. Neighborhood policing is about establishing a real connection between cops and the neighborhood, its problems, its people, and its potential. It's about the 3 Ps of community policing: partnership, problem solving, and prevention. It's about shared responsibility. It's about common purpose. It starts with steady sectors and putting the same cops in the same place every day. The same citizens become a recurrent part of each cop's daily work. They know each other. They see each other. For citizens, officers become more than their uniforms. They become mainstays of the of the neighborhood, as Sir Robert Peel envisioned it in 1829. Then we add in the position of neighborhood coordinating officers, or NCOs, something borrowed from my time with the LAPD and their senior lead officer program, the SLOW program. As I have said, this is the culmination of a long career, and I'm taking what works from here, there, and everywhere, starting with Peel's 9 principles, kind of like a wedding. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. The NCOs are dedicated to specific sectors, but unlike traditional community affairs cops, they're in the field to address conditions and crime. Together with the steady sectors, they prioritize problems and leverage NYPD assets and partners to fix them. I believe this model will be a great step forward in our effort to close the gap. We already have it up and running in 4 precincts, and we hope to, with the plan of action, expand it to 20 more. Cops want to connect to the people they serve. It's why they were called to the job. That's why we call it a calling. Neighborhood policing fosters this connection, and as the relationship takes root, trust grows, which brings us full circle within the 5 T's. Cops and community collaborate toward their mutual interest, a true public safety. With all of this, from ceasefire to mobile digital to neighborhood policing, we have the opportunity to make our communities safer and fairer everywhere for everyone. We have the opportunity to make public safety a shared responsibility that all of us can embrace. And if we get it right, that's a legacy, and we will get it right. I'm convinced that we can, just as I was convinced 20 years ago during my first term here as PC that we could do something about crime and disorder. Just as I was convinced in 2002 when I went to LA, I could do something about crime, disorder, terrorism, and race relations in that extraordinarily troubled city, and we did. But to accomplish this here in New York, for us to accomplish it in our great country, to create the change, we must all embrace it. To paraphrase Gandhi, the great Indian civil rights leader, to create change, we must become the change. The criminal justice sphere, and we its leaders, and you its supporters and community members, can't lose this opportunity to continue the journey of change that we've been on, the constant evolution of our police profession. But now the real work must begin. Let us not repeat history. Let's make it. Let's seize the opportunity that this crisis provides to successfully address the challenges of the 21st century, the inherited and unmet challenges of the 19th and 20th. Let's all have lives of significance. Let's all have lives that matter and that have profound and lasting impact. Let's all embrace the need to change. Thank you.